Welcome to The Maintenance Mindset, an audio-video podcast brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Paul Rose, and over the more than 3 decades in the apartment industry, I've had roles that include being on-site, providing services as a vendor, creating and delivering multiple education programs, and active association work. This podcast is centered on the often overlooked role that our on-site maintenance workers play. You know, the men and women that respond in the middle of the night to the toilet call, or the after hours, it's really hot in my apartment request, or my favorite, my ring fell down the drain, get over here now. In other words, the often unsung heroes who are responsible for asset preservation and resident satisfaction. Working in multifamily maintenance provides interesting, sometimes amusing, and often fascinating stories and viewpoints. My encouragement to you is this: whatever you do it with a maintenance mindset. Hey there. I have been reliably informed that right now, summer is over. Yeah, I know. It's possible that where you're at and listening to this recording right now, it's still warm because it's still hot outside. Weather, climate, all of those things. But I have been reliably informed that summer is, if not done, it's almost done. The way that I know that is that apparently the pumpkin donuts are now available nationwide. So get ready for the Arctic weather, time to get out the rake to deal with the leaves. Summer is over, whether you think it or not. Now, the point of this is not to belabor the fact that it is still hot outside, especially here in the South. But it's actually to attempt to get us to take a moment and pause. Possibly close the door on your office or go somewhere where it's quiet. I prefer to take a pad or something to write on. You take your laptop, take your phone, whatever your method of thinking out loud is. And what I would like to encourage you to do is to put a question at the top of whatever page or whatever you're working on, and let that question be: what can I do at my community now that can save problems later? We can even get specific. What could occur at my community that if I did it right now, I can save problems next summer? I mean, it's not a huge mental task to think the fact that our busiest season is the summertime. School's out, families look to move. That's the height of leasing season. It's also when most of our apartments, a majority of our leases move out for all of those aforementioned reasons. In addition, especially here in the South and the Southwest, air conditioning work orders are at their height. So you have an exaggerated quantity of work orders that are of an urgent nature. The possible second is during the winter when it gets really cold, especially for those of you who happen to be in the north. But maybe we'll have an end of winter conversation. Right now, we're talking about the end of summer. And specifically, I'm looking to address heating and air conditioning issues. Now, HVAC equipment, especially this year, 2025, is in the middle of a massive change. This year, beginning in January, R410A equipment can no longer be manufactured. That means that the equipment that we were installing in 2024, it's no longer being made new. And right now, after talking with several suppliers, there are fewer and fewer of that equipment available for us to purchase for our communities. And that's by design. That's a good thing. And this is why I think that question is so important for us to consider right now. The reason why, first of all, it's a good thing that we're starting to run out of R410A equipment is that beginning January of 2026, it's illegal to install it. That's why the EPA mandated a 1-year sell-through. In other words, if your sales representative from whatever supplier you use is telling you, no, the size of R410A equipment that you want is unavailable, they're probably telling you the truth, because their goal is to get rid of all of it this calendar year, because not only is it, from my understanding, illegal for them to sell, it's illegal for you and I to install it. So they have to get rid of it. They also have to have it gone so they can begin using the new systems that are legal to install right now today. Those systems have A2L refrigerants in them, and they're not compatible. We're not able to mix R410A equipment with new A2L refrigerant. And you cannot take the A2L refrigerant and buy the new equipment and install R410A in it. It's not going to function the way you designed it. To get even more specific, we're talking here about the refrigerants R32 and R454B. Now, for more details, this is not intended to be a podcast episode that goes into that details or gets that far in depth. I would actually encourage you to go back to the maintenance mindset episodes of the 2 episodes I did where I interviewed Matthew Trotter from Chadwell. Those, we got in depth on what to expect, what to do, changes to make for that equipment. Instead, I'm looking for us to answer in this episode what we can do today to get ready for next year's air conditioning environment, because the amount of change in between the two from an equipment and budgeting standpoint is going to be huge. However, if we pause right now, the change from a service standpoint could be minimal. That's why, in my mind, this question is an important one for us to answer. Now, we would need to begin, since this is the end of the summer, pause for a moment and look back at the work orders that you completed this year. What service requests can you identify as common issues that you or your maintenance technicians had to deal with on a regular basis? What was lingering? And by that, if you begin to look at the work orders that you did, and provided we were taking good notes for what occurred at those work orders, what work were we as a maintenance team more likely to perform Band-Aids on and then have to come back later and permanently fix? I mean, what if we're going this far, did we actually go back and permanently fix them? Or since we solved that problem in the moment and it's no longer being a complaint, or that problem is no longer in the analogy of the squeaky bearing gets the grease. If the bearing is no longer squeaking, have we forgotten we need to apply permanent grease? I think those are where we do. And this also, if your property is lacking this information, you have just identified the first thing that you can do now that can save massive amounts of time, energy, and finances later. We need to ensure that we have a standardized plan for documentation. If your air conditioning work orders, when you go pull them, if they have that 4-letter dreaded word, done, or any of its synonyms, adjusted, repaired, fixed, remedied, whatever, if that's the only documentation you have, change that at your community. Have a sit-down discussion with your teams, with all of your teams, both the maintenance and our office, especially when we begin talking about documentation. We need more details when the work order is created. What does a resident have? What are they saying? What's occurring? What's not occurring? What sound is it making? Does it smell like anything? All of those issues could be captured in a part of the service request origination. And by the way, if your office comes back and says, well, we don't know what questions to ask, great! How about a list? Begin with the ones I just gave you. Add to that anything specific to your property. If your property is still new enough to have the same systems in every one of your apartments, you can even get very specific in that you could have your office begin describing things on the system that our resident could identify. For instance, do you hear the high-pitched whine coming out of the closet when the system is operating? That can tell you that the fan motor is working, or if it doesn't normally have a high-pitched whine, that can tell you that either the capacitor is beginning to fail or the indoor fan motor is starting to fail. Those are items that we can identify and become knowledgeable so that our office can give us more information up front. The second piece of this is maintenance technicians. We've got to provide information on what we did, how much time it took, and what parts we used. All of that information is critical at the end of the summer so that we can look back and say, you know what? This year, we used a lot more refrigerant than we did last year. Maybe it's time for us to budget a new recovery machine. Do we have a micron gauge to deal with the decreased vacuum levels that the new systems are going to have? All of these are examples of questions that are going to come up just by performing this activity. What about if we're seeing a lot of emergency or overnight calls for simple requests? For instance, a lot of air conditioning systems now have a float switch on the drain pan. That's a good thing. The float switch in the drain pan is designed so that if the condensate drain backs up, instead of water overflowing the pan and making a lot of damage and doing the 4-letter M word that we all want to avoid at every single cost, the float switch identifies the fact that there is a backup and it opens the circuit, shutting off the air conditioner. Now, yes, that means if your system has a float switch attached to it and the drain line gets clogged, your system shuts down. Your resident doesn't know that the drain pipe for the condensate drain is backed up. All they know is it's getting hot in their apartment, and it's a simple thing it's a simple thing to unstop, remove the blockage of the drain line. The float switch then closes. Our system operates correctly. Well, here's why capturing that information, that detailed documentation is so good. If you notice this year you had more blockages than last year, guess what we need to be sure we're doing before next year? running around the property and preemptively unclogging all the drain lines. This could mean something as simple as taking the drain pan tabs, putting them in there so that you get a little bit of chemical dissolving into the drain line that helps to prevent the clogs. It stops that mucus, the yuck from building up and blocking the drain line. You could even be even more proactive and get what's called a swoosh gun. This is a little small handheld gun that you attach to the drain line, pull the trigger, and the little CO2 cartridge that's on the inside of it blows out any of that sludge out of the way of the drain line. If you do that from every single apartment, you'll be amazed at the decrease in clogged condensate drains. But the only way that we know that it's worth taking the effort to perform that is if we begin to see an increase in the amount of drain lines that are clogged. That's where that documentation comes into play. What about filters? Now, yes, we should be replacing our filters. I happen to believe that this is a role for maintenance technicians to perform. I'm not a big fan of having residents replace the filters. My experience is on properties when we used to have residents that would bring checks into us every month, I can remember properties that the resident would hand me a check, I would hand them a filter that would fit their air conditioning system. And the number of times when those residents moved out and I found brand new filters just sitting in the air conditioning closet, it was a huge quantity. Yes, I mean, there's an argument to be made. Yeah, but that wasn't everybody. Some people did it. You're exactly right. Some people did it. But which ones did it? Do you know? I know we gave them all a filter. We don't know. This is why I like organized. I want a preventive maintenance schedule. Once per quarter in an ideal world, we go through and replace all the air conditioning filters on the property. If that's not possible due to manpower and time and demand and make ready and all of those things, then at least keep track of the apartments that you went into this summer and you make it a mandate. If we go to your apartment for an air conditioning work order, you get a brand new filter. That way, at the end of the summer, right now, I can go back through the work orders, look at the reporting, and see any apartments that I didn't visit over the course of the summer. I know that right now, today, and possibly for the month of September into October, before the winter time comes, they need a new filter. So we schedule it. We make that happen. That's a benefit of sitting here. Oh, by the way, this time of year, we can also take an opportunity to communicate to our resident what's about to happen at the season change. You see, a couple of things occur, and it can vary based on what type of system you have. If your community has a gas furnace or an electric strip heater, one of the most common things that occurs is the burning smell. That's normal. During the spring and summer, there is still dust that gets past the filters. We've talked in previous episodes about filters, so we're not going to rehash that here. But the end result is the fact that when residents start up their heater in the winter as temperatures decrease, the first time they turn on their heater, the first time they turn on that gas furnace, the first time they turn on those electrical coils, they're going to burn off dust. It's not an emergency call as long as that smell goes away within a reasonable amount of time. Reasonable amount of time, it's going to vary. I would say if you still have a strong odor of burning dust a half hour after it's turned on, then yeah, we need to come take a look because there could be something else going on. like a piece of insulation may have fallen onto the burner or the heat exchanger. But if I'm not telling that information to my resident, they turn that on. If they're new to an apartment world and they turn that system on, and the first thing that they encounter is that burning dust smell with no other context, then we're looking for some problems and a lot of call outs that could have been prevented just by a little bit of pre-communication with our residents. Other things that they may encounter, if you have water heaters that are inside apartments, those water heaters will start to ting and ping differently. The majority of time, this is normal. And what's happening is, as the temperature outside begins to drop, as there's less sunlight in the air here in the northern hemisphere, that means the groundwater coming into our water heater, the temperature begins to lower. As it lowers, that changes how the water interacts with the tank of our water heater. Again, a lot of that's normal. It's an opportunity for us to pre-warn our residents that if they hear some different sounds coming out of their water heater, that's perfectly normal. As long as there's hot water coming out and no water on the floor, they're fine. Speaking of next year, now that it's the end of summer, it's a good time to go ahead and inventory your refrigerant. And by that, it begins with the systems that you have on hand. If you have any R410A systems on hand right now, be sure you've got a plan to get rid of them before January next year. As we already mentioned, it's going to be illegal to install them. Beyond the system, though, what about the actual refrigerant? Now, the refrigerant is not going away. R410A is not becoming illegal. It's just decreasing in availability. That means the 410A tanks, the ones that we have in our properties, in our shops, those are still perfectly fine. Matter of fact, you need them for the existing equipment that you have. But my question to you is, how much of it do you have on hand? In addition, because all refrigerants are a controlled substance, are your logs up to date? Now, that is more information for your maintenance technicians, because ultimately, in order to use refrigerant, you have to be certified. One of the things that we learned to become certified, we are required to document every single use of refrigerant. So it's the end of summer. We're going to begin to decrease our refrigerant usage before the end of the year. As a technician, do you know where you installed all the refrigerant that you used this year? If not, it's a good time now to update those records. And the thinking ahead, what can I do now to save time, equipment, problems later? It may be time to evaluate the system that we're using to document refrigerant use. Really, there is no specific EPA organized system that we have to use. I mean, there was some expensive notebooks that you could buy that, let's be honest, a lot of people bought, just not required. Yes, they work. They're great systems. They're very organized. They're very orderly. The EPA just wants to see a generic log. Basically, what you need to know is what address, in other words, what apartment did was the refrigerant taken or added to, when, what you did. If you're adding refrigerant, that means some of it leaked out. What did you do to stop the refrigerant that you just put in that system from coming out again? Or when you took it out because it's overcharged, Where did you take it from? And how is it stored? Which jug did you put it into? For more information on this specific, look back at the episode that we did on the 3 R's of air conditioning: recovery, recycling, and reclaiming. All that went into a lot greater detail. For this exercise, how are we doing? If we need to update our process, now's the time to do it. It's a good idea to begin instilling those good habits right now before we get busy again next year. Speaking of reclaiming, in other words, the refrigerant that we've removed from a system that we need to get rid of so that it gets cleaned up and the ability for it to be reused, resold in a cleaned state. At your community, you are supposed to have 1 jug per different refrigerant. If your property's old enough to still have some R22 original equipment manufactured systems, these are systems that were manufactured prior to 2010, or depending on where you're at, 2015. In other words, 10 years ago, it became illegal to install these older kinds of systems. It's very possible you still have these systems available to you and are being serviced, and you can service them. You can keep them in rotation. From a financial standpoint, it's a good thing to do. From an efficiency and a long-term longevity standpoint, it might be a good idea to begin to consider replacing them. But that's another opportunity that we have to begin making plans. If you have a 100-unit property and 70 out of the 100 units that you have at your community are still R22 equipment, it might be a good time now to figure out how much money we need to begin setting aside so that next year we can begin to replace them. Or based on our current replacement trends, if we replaced 20 of them this year, maybe next year we need to budget for replacing 25. Just because entropy is job security, meaning that equipment is going to continue to fail. It's aging out. The jugs of refrigerant that you have, the reason why I brought up R22 specifically is because R22, unlike R410A equipment, R22 has what are called retrofit refrigerants. That means that R22 and HCFC is illegal. No more of it's being used, it's not being manufactured, and it's expensive when you can find it. It's still available, you can look around for it. But the retrofit refrigerants meant that on equipment that was originally designed to use R22, I had other refrigerants that I could substitute. Most commonly, MO99, or also known as R438, New 22, also known as 422B. You also had R421, which is also known as Choice. These also knowns are marketing and easier to remember names. But those are just 3 examples of potential replacement refrigerants that take the place of R22. And what that means is you have to have, if you're using R22 and all 3 of those replacements, you actually have to have 5 recovery jugs at your property. 1 for each of those 4 refrigerants and another one for junk refrigerant. The number 1 rule where refrigerants are concerned is you never mix refrigerants. That means if I recover R22 from a system, I have to recover it into an R22 jug. The same for MO99, the same for New 22, the same for Choice, the same for whatever refrigerant I'm using. Do not mix refrigerants. If you don't know what refrigerant is in a system? One, documentation. We've discussed that before. Two, that's refrigerant that goes into the junk so that you don't overly contaminate the refrigerant that you have in each of those individual jugs that are clearly marked. Now, the reason why this is important, I'm going to let you in on a little secret for our industry. Are you ready? The reclaimed refrigerant that you have can be sold. Yes, there are companies that will purchase your used refrigerant and pay you money for it. I don't know how much. I don't know what the worth is. I do know that especially for R410A, the value is going to continue to go up. For a short period of time, those recovered substitute refrigerants for R22, that price is expected to go up. The way to sell it is the more pure that the recovered refrigerant is, the more money it's worth, because the easier the reclamation companies have at reclaiming it. Again, I don't know how much, but anything's better than nothing. And it's the proper thing to do, because remember, refrigerant is only to be found either in a system or a jug. And reclaimed refrigerant that you turn over to a processing plant to be resold, is the way that we're going to keep costs down on refrigerant going forward. So we've got to be a part of that solution. By the way, this is the time to review your reclamation plan. Again, it begins with documentation. Do you have good documentation for your technicians? Or if you are a technician, do you know where you put every ounce of refrigerant? The jugs that you have, are they clearly marked? Have you purged them lately of non-condensables? What is their situation? And if they're full, which is 80% by volume, if they're full, get rid of them. They're just taking up space. Again, reach out to reclamation facilities that are around. I would recommend listening to HVAC Excellence podcast called Did You Know? The HVAC Excellence podcast show. They talk with several reclamation companies who will purchase the refrigerant, and they'll even pay to remove it from your property. So you don't have to ship it anywhere. They will either come get it, or they'll tell you where to drop it off at. All of this is available in their free resources. All you have to do is a little bit of research. Wow. We covered a lot of ground today. If your brain feels full, that's okay. The important point is, this is the end of summer. This, more than any other time, is when is a good time to think back on what occurred this year and take a moment and think through what we can change now before we get to the busyness that is next summer. I hope you implement some of these ideas. Let me know what you think. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you somewhere. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Maintenance Mindset. I hope you take away ideas that apply to your current and future career goals. Please check out Maintenance Mindset Minute to hear short-form, high-impact, applicable, maintenance-centered information. Whatever you do today, do it with a maintenance mindset. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. Visit multifamilymedianetwork.com to learn more about our other industry podcasts, thought pieces, and sponsorship opportunities. I'll see you somewhere.